I still remember the exact sentence. Not because it was loud. Not because it was dramatic. But because it changed my life in a way I didn't understand until almost a year later. She looked at the menu, forced a smile, and said, "I can't afford this meal." Then she stood up and walked away. And what happened after that is something I still think about almost every day. My name is Carson Miller. I'm 28 years old. At the time this happened, I lived in Denver, Colorado. I worked as a project coordinator for a construction company. Nothing exciting. Mostly spreadsheets, phone calls, and trying to keep contractors from yelling at each other. I rented a small apartment near downtown. The kind of place where you could hear your neighbors arguing through the walls. My life was simple. Predictable. Honestly, a little lonely. But I had one thing that made everything feel stable. My best friend. His name was Ethan. We'd known each other since middle school. His family moved to Colorado when we were 13. Somehow we ended up sitting next to each other in science class. 20 minutes later we were arguing about basketball. 20 years later we were still arguing about basketball. That was Ethan. Every conversation somehow became a debate. He was the kind of friend who could make a trip to the grocery store feel entertaining. We had history. The kind you can't fake. Late-night road trips. Terrible apartments. Breakups. Job losses. Family problems. We'd seen each other at our worst. And somehow stayed friends through all of it. For years, I honestly thought nothing could ever come between us. I was wrong. The person who changed everything entered my life because of him. Her name was Olivia. She wasn't his girlfriend. At least not then. She worked at a bookstore a few blocks from Ethan's apartment. They'd become friends through a volunteer event. One Saturday, Ethan invited me to grab coffee. When I got there, Olivia was sitting with him. I remember almost nothing about what she looked like. But I remember her energy. She listened carefully. Like she actually cared about what people were saying. Most people wait for their turn to talk. Olivia didn't. She paid attention. That sounds small. But it isn't. Not anymore. When Ethan introduced us, she smiled. "You're Carson?" I nodded. "Yeah." She laughed. "I feel like I already know you. Hopefully only the good parts." "Oh, definitely not." Ethan nearly spilled his coffee laughing. That was our first conversation. Nothing special. Nothing dramatic. At least that's what I thought. Over the next few months, our paths crossed more often. Usually because of Ethan. Movie nights. Trivia nights. Random dinners. Group events. Normal stuff. Sometimes Olivia would join. Sometimes she wouldn't. But gradually she became part of our little circle. Looking back, I think that's when things started changing. Not between us. Inside me. I just didn't notice. At first, Olivia was simply easy to talk to. There was no awkwardness. No pressure. We could spend an hour discussing ridiculous things. Favorite childhood cartoons. Bad first jobs. Strange customer stories. Whatever. Conversation just flowed. One night after trivia, Ethan left early because of work. Olivia and I ended up walking toward the parking lot together. It was cold. The streets were almost empty. And somewhere during that walk, we stopped talking about random things. She asked me something unexpected. "Are you happy?" I laughed. "That's a heavy question." "I know." "No warning." "Nope." I thought about it. Longer than I expected. Then I said, "I don't know." She nodded. Like she'd expected that answer. And somehow that bothered me. Because it meant she saw something I hadn't. After that, I started paying attention to her more. Not intentionally. It just happened. I noticed how she remembered tiny details. How she'd ask about things weeks later. How she'd check on people without making it obvious. Most people say they care. Olivia actually did. A few months later, everything changed. Ethan started dating her. Officially. I remember the exact night he told me. We were watching a basketball game. He looked unusually nervous. Then he said, "So, Olivia and I are together." For half a second, something strange happened inside me. A feeling. Small. Sharp. Gone almost immediately. I ignored it. Because there was nothing to think about. My best friend liked a good person. That should have been a good thing. And it was. At least that's what I told myself. The first year of their relationship seemed solid. They looked happy. Really happy. The kind of happy that makes everyone around them relax. I never questioned it. Never imagined anything would go wrong. Then Ethan got a job opportunity. A huge one. A company in Seattle offered him a position. Better pay. Better future. Everything. The problem was Olivia couldn't move immediately. Her mother had health issues. She needed to stay in Denver. At least for a while. Long distance started. And long distance did what long distance often does. It created gaps. Small gaps at first. Then larger ones. Then silence. One winter night, my phone rang around 11. It was Olivia. That alone felt unusual. I answered. Hey. Her voice sounded shaky. Can you help me? My stomach dropped. What happened? Her car had broken down on a dark road outside the city. She was alone. Scared. And waiting for a tow truck. I grabbed my keys immediately. 40 minutes later, I found her sitting inside her car. The heater wasn't working. She looked exhausted. Relieved when she saw me. We waited together until the tow truck arrived. Then I drove her home. Simple. Normal. Except it wasn't. Because during that drive, something shifted. She started talking. Really talking. About her mom. About stress. About feeling alone. About Ethan being far away. About how hard everything had become. And for the first time, I realized she wasn't okay. Not even close. That conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. Neither of us wanted it to end. That should have been my warning sign. After that night, we talked more. Not every day. But enough. Sometimes she'd call. Sometimes I'd text. Sometimes we'd run into each other. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing hidden. At least not at first. But emotional lines are strange. You don't always notice when you're crossing them. Weeks turned into months. And somehow she became the person I talked to most. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself we were friends. Maybe I even believed it. Then one evening she called crying. Her mother had been admitted to the hospital unexpectedly. I met her there. We sat in a waiting room for hours. Mostly in silence. At one point she leaned her head against the wall and whispered, "I'm tired." Not physically. Emotionally. I could hear it. And for some reason, hearing those words hurt. Because I wanted to fix it. And I couldn't. Before I continue, if you've been enjoying the story so far, I'd really appreciate it if you liked the video and subscribed. I don't usually talk about this part of my life. So honestly, the support means more than you think. Anyway, that hospital night stayed with me. Not because something happened. Because nothing happened. We just sat there. Hour after hour. And somehow that felt important. A few weeks later, Ethan visited Denver. The three of us met for dinner. And something felt different. I couldn't explain it. But I could feel it. Conversations felt forced. Silences felt heavier. At one point Ethan got up to use the restroom. Olivia stared down at her drink. Then quietly said, "Do you ever feel like life moves faster than you can keep up with?" I looked at her. She looked exhausted. And sad. And before I could answer, Ethan came back. The moment disappeared. But it stayed in my head. 4 days. Then weeks. Then months. The guilt started growing. Because by then I knew. I knew I was emotionally attached. I knew I looked forward to her messages. I knew hearing her voice improved my day. And I hated myself for it. Ethan trusted me. He trusted both of us. That mattered. It should have mattered more. I started pulling away. Answering texts later. Avoiding calls. Creating distance. At first Olivia noticed. Then she asked about it. I lied. Just busy. She didn't believe me. Neither did I. One rainy evening she showed up outside my apartment unexpectedly. I remember opening the door and freezing. She looked frustrated. Confused. Hurt. "Why are you avoiding me?" There it was. The question I'd been dreading. I couldn't answer honestly. So I didn't. We talked for almost an hour. Mostly in circles. Then finally she said something I'll never forget. "I feel like I'm losing one of my best friends." Friend. That word hit harder than it should have. Because it reminded me of reality. And reality was simple. She wasn't mine. She never had been. After she left, I sat alone in my apartment for hours. Trying to convince myself to let go. Trying to be a good friend. Trying to be a decent person. But emotions don't follow rules. The hardest part wasn't loving her. The hardest part was pretending I didn't. Months later, everything reached a breaking point. Ethan and Olivia were struggling. Constant arguments. Distance. Miscommunication. Exhaustion. One night Olivia called. Her voice sounded empty. They broke up. I knew immediately who she meant. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then she started crying. Not dramatic crying. The quiet kind. The kind that's harder to listen to. I drove to her apartment. We sat on her balcony. The city lights stretched across the horizon. Neither of us said much. Eventually she looked at me. I thought he'd be the one. I didn't know what to say. Because part of me felt heartbroken for her. And another part felt something much uglier. Hope. That realization made me sick. Months passed. Slowly things changed. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Just little things. More conversations. More time together. More honesty. Then one night we found ourselves walking through downtown after dinner. Snow was falling lightly. The streets were quiet. We stopped beneath a streetlight. Neither of us speaking. Just standing there. And for a moment it felt like the entire city disappeared. She looked at me. I looked at her. There was sadness in her eyes. And something else. Something neither of us wanted to name. Then she whispered, "You've always been there." I swallowed hard. "Yeah, you really have." Neither of us moved. Neither of us looked away. And then she stepped forward and hugged me. That's all. Just a hug. But somehow it felt bigger than anything I'd experienced before. Because it wasn't about romance. It was about everything we'd never said. Everything we'd been avoiding. Everything we'd been carrying. When we finally pulled apart, neither of us knew what came next. A few weeks later, we tried. Carefully. Slowly. Honestly. We started dating. And for a while, I convinced myself things would work out. That maybe life was just messy. That maybe timing was strange. That maybe people find each other in unexpected ways. But there was one problem. One huge problem. Ethan. I hadn't told him. I kept delaying it. Making excuses. Waiting for the right moment. The right moment never came. Instead, reality came first. One evening there was a knock on my apartment door. I opened it. And saw Ethan. My heart stopped. Because Olivia's jacket was hanging on the chair behind me. He saw it instantly. The silence that followed felt endless. Then he looked at me. Not angry. Not yelling. Just hurt. And somehow that was worse. Much worse. "What is this?" I couldn't answer. Because every answer sounded terrible. Eventually he nodded. Like he'd figured everything out himself. Then he left. That's all. No fight. No screaming. Just silence. The next day he sent a text. One sentence. "I expected this from a lot of people. Not you." I stared at that message for hours. And honestly, a part of me still stares at it. Even now. Months later, Ethan stopped speaking to both of us. Completely. No calls. No messages. Nothing. And whether it was fair or not, I understood. The friendship I'd trusted my entire life was gone. Just like that. Olivia and I stayed together. For a while. Almost 8 months. Then something unexpected happened. Something neither of us saw coming. One evening we went to a small restaurant downtown. Nothing fancy. Just burgers and fries. The place was crowded. Noisy. Normal. Then halfway through dinner, Olivia became quiet. Really quiet. I asked if she was okay. She nodded. But I knew better. A few minutes later she looked around the room. Then back at me. And said something strange. "Do you know what I keep thinking about?" "What?" "The night my car broke down." I smiled slightly. "That was a long time ago." "Yeah." Then she looked down. And her eyes started filling with tears. I think that was the moment I stopped feeling alone. I didn't know what to say. Because hearing that felt beautiful. And heartbreaking. At the same time. Then she said something that changed everything. "That's the problem." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She took a long breath. And finally told me the truth. A truth she'd apparently been carrying for months. She wasn't in love with me because of who I was. Not entirely. She was in love with how safe she felt during the worst period of her life. I represented comfort. Stability. Rescue. A place to land. And somewhere along the way, she'd confused that feeling with love. The words hurt. But deep down, I already knew. Because if I was honest, I'd done the same thing. We sat there for a long time. Neither of us crying. Neither of us angry. Just sad. A different kind of sadness. The kind that arrives when you finally understand something. A week later we ended things. No drama. No betrayal. No huge fight. Just two people realizing they weren't what each other needed. I thought that would be the end. But it wasn't. Because 6 months later, I received a message from a number I didn't recognize. Just one photo. Nothing else. The photo showed a receipt. From the restaurant where Olivia and I had ended our relationship. I stared at it for several seconds. Confused. Then I noticed the date. It wasn't from our breakup night. It was from much earlier. Years earlier. The first time the three of us had eaten there together. Back when Ethan and Olivia were still happy. Back when everything was simple. At the bottom of the receipt, someone had written a note. 3 words. In Olivia's handwriting. "Thank you, Ethan." That was it. No explanation. No message. Nothing. I never found out why she sent it. Maybe she wanted me to understand something. Maybe she wanted herself to understand something. But for the first time, I realized a painful truth. The story I'd been telling myself was wrong. I spent years believing I was the person who saved her. The person who showed up. The person who changed her life. But maybe I wasn't. Maybe I arrived during a chapter that Ethan had already helped write. Maybe the reason she trusted me was because someone else had taught her how trust felt first. And somehow that realization hurt more than losing her. Because it changed every memory. Every conversation. Every moment. Even now, years later, I still think about that restaurant. About that receipt. About the things people mean to each other without realizing it. And sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd simply stayed a friend. If I'd protected the one relationship that had been there since I was 13. Maybe nothing would be different. Maybe everything would. I don't know. What I do know is this. The night she said, "I can't afford this meal," and walked away wasn't really about money at all. She was talking about something much bigger. A cost none of us understood yet. And by the time we finally did, the people we loved most had already paid for it.